Hello and welcome to this week's lecture on Chapter 8. And again, my apologies for a little too much time in the airplane and poor food. So here I am. I'm going to present the ideas I wanted to talk about in class regarding media and technology. And this is to supplement, of course, the reading. The reading is sufficient to do all the quizzes, but it's good to get some of this conversation out. So let's go right to the slideshow now. And here we have Chapter 8, Media and Technology. And I want to start off a definition of technology, kind of a very generic one, as the application of science to the problems of everyday life. Now, this occurs in many, many different ways. Science, in all of its manifestation, produces much of our material culture. We use science, for example, to develop technologies to harvest trees, cut them into boards. We use other technology to create nails. We use other technology to create tools. And all of this, of course, throughout the evolution of building practices, has produced a modern house. Now, so when we think about technology in this sociological manner, we're thinking about all of material culture. Nearly all. There might be natural formations that become part of a person's culture. Certainly, a lake might be important in somebody's culture because their entire upbringing was with fishing and boating and those kind of things. So you have the lake as part of their material culture, and it certainly wasn't necessarily created by people, but almost everything else that we talk about in terms of material culture refers to some type of technology. Even in the world of psychology, there is a reference to the skill sets that we develop for particular endeavors, such as the different therapies that are out there, can sometimes be referred to as the psychological technology, the techniques being equated with the development of technology. Again, this kind of statement of technology as being a product of science that solves problems. So I want to reflect to you on an experience I had a few years ago where the Society for the Teaching of Psychology was coming out with a book on the use of technology in the classroom, specifically face-to-face classrooms, not so much the online. This is pre-pandemic, and I applied, submitted some proposals for different chapters, and the one they accepted was my introduction. I'd actually put in to write the introduction to this book, and that's the one that got accepted. And I focused on this sort of broad sense of technology as a change agent in our society. Technology comes along, it's developed as a product of our culture, but it also comes back and changes our culture. And the example that I used for this particular essay that I wrote is the chalkboard versus the whiteboard. Now, in my history here at KVCC, when I came here, the turn of the century, 1999, kind of funny to say it that way, everything was chalkboards at KVCC. So this was very familiar to me as a person who went through lots of school. Everywhere I went, there was always chalkboards. Here I was Here's chalkboards. I got multicolored chalk. I loved chalkboard. I wrote about all of the experiences that I had with the chalkboard and how much I liked them. There's actually some interesting stories about when I was a kid and I was assigned to clean chalkboards. There's a certain teacher that I had for teaching geometry who would click his chalk on the board because he wrote very cleanly and not like me, and rapidly, so you could hear the staccato clicking sound. And I reflected on that as deeply ingrained in my sense of learning and teaching. And Tom Kelly was the name of that teacher, and still a person that I admire to this day. as being generating a lot of what I feel teaching is all about. And then as I was at KV over the next couple of years, things started to change and the whiteboard started to appear. And the idea, the problem was I guess we wanted something that cleaned better. So just starting for the very fresh slate, to do that in a chalkboard, you have to kind of, really clean it with water and soap and everything, get that a special soap, get that all like I did when I was a kid, and get it all ready. And when you erased, it always made those white marks. So for some reason, our society wanted to go for something cleaner, this whiteboard, which would also emphasize colors. I mean, I had colored chalk, but yellow was pretty close to white, light blue, it wasn't as vibrant as the changes that we could occur on a whiteboard. I hated, and to this day, I really don't like whiteboards. I use them all the time because that's all they are, but the dryers dry out, the markers dry out. Sometimes you go to erase and it still has that image on it. It's not my favorite thing. But for a very long time, I held on to the one classroom that was left. It was in King Hall that had a chalkboard. And I wanted all my classes to be in that room. And then one semester, several years after all the other classrooms had transferred over to whiteboards, I came in one fall to see that my precious blackboard had been replaced with a whiteboard. And it ended. So I experienced and expressed in that essay this idea that technology comes along. Sometimes it's out of our control. Something comes along and it changes the way we do our work. We have to adjust to that. Sometimes we can be the motivator of that, such as when online came on and using online technology to supplement live classes, which was a large aspect of this particular book that came out. Those are ones that faculty themselves often took on and said, let's grasp this technology. But it implies change in the way we do things, and of course it impacts our customers, our students, the way that we interact with them. And so that was my little story about blackboards versus whiteboards. I would probably rather still have a blackboard, but nonetheless, it's not to be. So let's look at norms, values, expectations, and material culture in this light that I've just presented. So we've already determined that society is built up of a culture, and that culture can be defined by its norms, values, expectations, and material culture. The material culture being a product of the norms, values, expectations, and previous material technology. And now we can see that this material technology is also feeding back into the norms, values, and expectations. These are these funny conversations we can have about the way things were and the way things are now, and the way things were when your grandparents went to school and how different it was, and now we have computers, and even not that long ago we can think about dramatic changes that have happened in terms of the expectations for students coming into school. And so you have this feedback system that's going in. So material culture, as much as it's a product of our culture, it is also a change agent. In that, we can kind of look at this as change itself. Before I go on to that slide, change itself can be somewhat stressful. Now let's go back to when we were talking about status and role. Now, status being your job description, status being your job title, role being your job description. Technology comes in and messes with your job description. That might not change your title, but suddenly, as in years ago, you had to move from a typewriter into a word processor, into a computer, into a tablet. You had to make those moves. The way you go about doing your work changed. Now, largely, these changes have resulted in greater efficiency. I will tell you, having written many papers on, it was an electric typewriter, but nonetheless, having written many papers on an electric typewriter, that having a word processor where you can go back and change things before you have to print anything, that was a time saver. As soon as I made a mistake writing on that typewriter, I had to rip out that page. That page was now done, put another piece of paper in and start typing again in order to not make that mistake. If I want to move one thing to another place, like we do copy and paste, wow, you have to rewrite all that section, retype it out. So that move from typewriters to word processors is a huge change that I experienced halfway through college. When I went from my sophomore year to junior year, I transferred college and I went from an electric typewriter to word processing in my junior year of college. So now, one of the factors associated with the adoption of technology and changing technology and whatnot is the actual speed at which that happens. Normally, way back, technology didn't change a lot during your lifespan, so your job description really didn't fundamentally change, and usually changes were handed off to the next generation. When a new farm tool came out, the father or the grandfather or the grandmother or what, they just kept doing what they were doing, and they let the young people learn the new technology because there was a generational span between when old technology became obsolete and new technology became necessary. That kind of change that happens. So sociologically, we can look at how different technologies have arrived on the scene, just in terms of the history of the United States over the last 120 years or so. So let's look at this graph here. And what this graph represents is a number of different technologies. We can see the telephone, electricity, refrigeration, stoves, color TVs, air conditioning, computers. And it shows the degree to which, it shows the date when those entered as available, and the line traces the percentage of U.S. households that have then adopted that technology. And I want to compare two of them. Now, the first one is the telephone, and you'll see over to the left, the telephone is a dotted line, and it starts before the 1900s, a little bit before there, and it goes up, and then it dips down a little bit, and it takes all the way until nearly 2000, maybe the year 2000 or so, before we get 90 some odd percent of households having that. So this particular change occurred over almost 100 years. It took 100 years, 2 generations, 3, for the telephone to reach 90% saturation, and pretty much today, we expect everybody to have a phone. It's interesting, for example, if you look at this graph and you see the detail associated with the telephone, that it actually, in around 2000, it peaks, and then it starts coming down. And that is largely because of the introduction of cell phones. Now look over to the right where the 1990 is. You see the line way back to 1980 or so is when cell phones started being produced. And look how low it was, just very low, all the way until maybe 1995 or so. And then it shoots up. So if we look at the amount of time from the introduction of the product to 90% saturation, we would see that it was only 20 years. Now that pace of technological influence on the way we do a basic thing, such as how do we make a phone call over to someone, kind of exemplifies this increased speed of change. Now, this does stress, just like when we talked about, the job description and role strain or role conflict that comes in. Technology can create a conflict, and it creates strain, and it creates stress, and we're there. Now, the ability for someone to adapt is what allows us to continue to be okay. Now, probably if we graphed our individual capacity for being able to adapt ourselves to new technology, we would see that over these ages, from the 1900s until the modern day, one of the characteristics of human beings that is most salient is that we've increased our capacity to adapt to change. So we're better at doing this than we used to be. Nonetheless, the pace of change can be very, very stressful. And we can see that even if we just change, let's say at KV, we change from one learning management system to another. As many of you came into this college, your only experiences with Brightspace. Some of our students who had been here prior had gotten used to our previous learning management system, Blackboard, and they come in and like, oh, not only am I taking new classes, have to new information, dealing with the pandemic, but I also have to adapt my skills to a new learning management system in order to interact with my instructors. Okay, at this point, I'd like to switch gears a little bit, and we've been talking about the actual changes in technology and how they affect society, and certainly how society affects those changes and calls on the demands of those changes. Now I want to take some time to look at media as a socializing agent and really kind of concentrate this on social media for the conversation now. Although all media has the role of teaching us culture. That's why we use media. Often we use the newspapers to learn about what's going on. We use books, we use television, we use movies, we use the news, we use the internet to learn about the world around us and to help shape ourselves inside of that. Now, the question that comes up is now the evolution of social media as an interactive forum, whereas individuals contribute and receive from that system. Very different than many of the other medias, which are very largely consuming media. So to a degree, the social media has actually created a venue where we can participate in the creation of this social reality. And that has, of course, its advantages, but of course it has disadvantages as well. Now, keeping in mind that whenever we've talked about media, there was an age at which the media was presented as a way of pretty much socializing. We sold newspapers, but that's what paid for the newspaper. We paid for that, paid for a book, paid to go see a movie. When the internet was created and the web was created, that was way before the modern view of the web. But when that was created, it was largely free, government-sponsored internet for scientists to communicate with each other. That's really kind of the way that got started. And then the web was created, and then within the protocols of web, they developed the concept of a .com. Now, .com stands for commercial, which is the economic use of the web to share information and potentially even sell products, as of course is widespread now. Now, media has, for a very long time, even back when there was a period of time, it's in the course book, where we transferred from media as being funded by the user and consumer to being funded by advertising. So advertisers would pay to have time or space on the media in order to inform their customers, potential customers, about their products. This has evolved, of course, into our modern sense of media, which is largely free. We have to pay for access, but, largely free. And commercials inform us as to the products. And just to give you an example, certainly if you go to a box store like Walmart and you walk up to any associate that's working there and say, okay, I have a white shirt, there's ketchup all over it, I need to get that out. What do I get? And you will probably unless you're lucky and fortunate, not encounter an expert on getting stains out of clothes. That's what commercials are for. Commercials in the media are there to tell you what you need to get ketchup stains out of your white shirt. So it's almost invariant right now that we, preparing to go to Walmart, would actually do the research ourselves, go up, do a Google search, whatever, and we would find out what the best product is. And the only question we would ask the associates, which is the only thing they're expected to know, is where do I find it? When is it going to be in stock again? Do you have any out back? You know, any one of those things, basically about the where the product is and how can I get it. Now, social media is free. You know, we can create a Facebook account, Instagram account, and all that stuff for free. And underneath that, however, is the notion that this is a commercial product. So how does a company like Facebook and its subsidiary, Instagram, make money? It's pretty simple. Whoops. It's pretty simple. My little switching is not very simple. If you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. Information that you put onto Facebook, Instagram, the way you navigate around Google, is collected and sold for a cost to companies that connect products with your preferences. So that when you go online and let's say you go online and you're searching to buy a new light fixture for your kitchen, and the next time you go onto Google, the sidebars are full of light fixtures for kitchens. There you go. That's how it works. You presented yourself as a shopper in the market for lights for your kitchen. That algorithm connected you with potential products that you would buy. That is how they make money. Now, the question then becomes, how divisive is this? And in the recent goings-on that were discovered here at Facebook and Instagram, it's created some worrisome situation. Now, recently, what has come out is whistleblowers who used to work for Facebook and Instagram have indicated that, in truth, algorithms reward engagement, meaning if we click on something, we see something, every time we like something, that all adds up to that particular item being pushed forward in terms of how much it is reposted. In truth, postings about that focused on the insecurities of children, their looks, their weight, were falsely pushed to the front in order to create new customers and hungry customers, no pun intended, for people who were selling products to this group of people. And it's been recognized now that the fact that so many messages about negative body image are prevalent on these social media areas, that individuals' real self-esteem is being affected by that. Now, understand here, as I'm going to get into a little bit later, the sense of Facebook itself is that we create an identity on there, and Facebook becomes, for many people, perhaps for all of us, a member of our looking glass committee. And the question, we may have a healthy relationship with Facebook. And we turn to Facebook to get some ideas, to reflect, bounce things off of our friends and whatnot, and that's the end of it. However, we may have an unhealthy development of our relationship with Facebook, and the identity which we have created on Facebook becomes a very, very important part of our own identity. So what happens in that social environment becomes incredibly important, like when we're meeting with our peers or our parents. Now, there could be all kinds of good reasons for that to happen, but certainly what's been identified is that because of the commercial aspect of Facebook and Instagram, this was being manipulated in order to create a demand for the kinds of products that would be sold to kids who have very poor body image. And that this was known and that it was a manipulated aspect of these social media platforms. This has opened a Pandora's box as to what degree to this is also reflected in their political, racial, gender issues and whatnot that we see rampant on Facebook. And Google is not innocent. They too have algorithms that bring certain products to you, just like I was talking before, and the number of likes or the number of times an opinion gets shot up there, or even the manipulation of the content on a website can actually cause the Google algorithms to push those things up toward the top. Now, the reason why I say that's important is because there's been plenty of studies done about how people use Google, and one of the questions is, how deep do they go into their Google search to find the answer? And the answer is not much. In fact, not only will they not generally go, not only we will not go, I'm going to put myself in there too, to the second page of Google results, we will often not even scroll. So the first 3 or 4 items that come up are the ones that get clicked on the most, regardless of their content, regardless of the validity or expertise of our search results do not determine their position in how they come up. There are things that people put into their websites. There are clues that they put in, the way they will create the number of links to my website will create a higher order. There are companies that actually offer services to bring your website, regardless of the content, to push your website higher up in the results list of certain kinds of searches into Google. So this is an artificial prioritization. It's not a logic one, like if you went to a library and you saw books that were up there on a certain topic, you know that those books were curated for quality, hopefully. Quality, if they're in the reference section, they're quality sources that have been reviewed and we can kind of hang our hat on them. This is not the case in Google searches. So Google is implicated in this sort of manipulation of the collective understanding of our world based on false premises, not based on validity, reliability, authority, and whatnot of information, but on other circumstances related to the algorithms of these particular platforms. Now, Google and other platforms can be analyzed sociologically by looking at our different perspectives, and we'll include, of course, Facebook and Instagram in this. So let's take a look, let's say, at the functional perspective. Now, Google, Facebook, and Instagram and all the others have become almost essential parts of the way we interact with people, certainly has brought the world close together, and great things have happened of all these platforms. I'm not against, in any way, these platforms. However, there are problems that come along with that. Now, we shop, now just like I was telling you, we shop through Google. We buy things online largely, and even if we are going to the store, we usually do our research on Google prior to that. We expand our social networks using Facebook. The period of time in which Facebook went down was a dramatic decrease in some people's social interaction with others. They became isolated. They became depressed. And I don't mean in like this is a clinical problem, although that exists. Addiction to Facebook does exist. But individuals who are isolated, and really that's the only method by which they can reach out. Individuals with mobility issues, individuals with social anxiety and those kinds of things. This exacerbated the symptomology of whatever was going on with them and became, quite a problem for those individuals. So these technologies in which we become dependent, when they go away, even temporarily, cause problems. Just like when the electricity goes out, it's kind of like, oh, I can't do a whole bunch of things that I used to be able to do. Now, we can also look at this from a conflict perspective, and certainly the recent issues with Facebook and Instagram certainly run conflictual to the kind of ways we want to see these tools being used. There's, of course, people who access these things, people who don't, bullying, cyberbullying, those kind of powers that get expressed on social media and Google. And just looking at that whole idea of companies that allow, will work with you to push your results on the top. My band is a Elton John tribute band called Yellow Brick Road, and we have a website that comes up very high on a search for Elton John tribute bands. And we worked on that, in terms of the content of the website, the number of other places that link to us, the duration of the pictures, and the alternative descriptions of pictures, all of which contribute to the algorithms that push us higher. We were approached by a company that said that they would help us do that, but for the tasty price of $25,000. We ended up doing it ourselves through a number of generations of that website and avoided the $25,000. But that tells you, first, placement can be bought, and it has nothing to do with the content of the website. It has to do with manipulating the code behind the website, and that's what that company was offering to do. So that can, the thing that comes up to the front might not be the best thing, and certainly that's conflictual when we're trying to answer important questions. Now, in terms of symbolic interactionists, I'm going to focus here on the development of our identity in relation to our use of social media. So individuals develop a digital identity. We have that exist. It exists in terms of our footprints that we leave all over the internet by our searches, which are recorded and analyzed, by our content that we put up there, things about ourselves, our friend selections, all of those things are calculated and they're sold. That information is sold to potential advertisers who will customize advertising right to us. For many people, it becomes a part of their identity. The establishment of who they are online becomes a part of who we are. And this is very real because, for example, the way in which we behave online is subject to review by potential employers. I don't know of any employers right now who, considering individuals for positions, does not look them up on Facebook and kind of look at how they interact with others. So if you're dropping the F-bomb and you're doing all these political slams and all of these things, that is your public persona as it appears on Facebook, and it's considered real. And it may affect how people see you in other social areas, such as job interviews and those kinds of things. So we have to be very aware of the impact of that. Now, socialization is reciprocal. So to what degree do individuals rely on the information feedback they get from Facebook to define themselves? Back to that idea of the Facebook having a seat on the table of your committee that you incorporate into a sense of self. And certainly we've seen the gamut. We've seen individuals who don't have Facebook accounts, couldn't care less. We have individuals who, because of interactions they've had in Facebook, have gone through trauma, suicide attempts, drug use, poor self-esteem, dropping out, those kind of things, dramatic effects by the interactions in this particular social media. Again, it's not that the social media itself is problematic. How we use it, and certainly what has been revealed, how it uses our information to manipulate our buying behavior is, of course, subject to some review. Right now, we want these services to be available. We also want them to be safe. So certainly there are individuals, and many of us probably establish ourselves, we establish a very constructed social presence in social media, and it becomes a part of who we are. So a part of our symbolic interactionist perspective is that way in which it shapes our identity. Now, postmodern, of course, about consumerism and technology and whatnot, kind of gone over that. This is using the web as sort of the way to get things. And despite its absence from the course book, exchange theory is again prevalent in this particular area because that is how these systems work. I like you, you like me, you like your post, I like your post, you like my post. That kind of dynamic exchange certainly beats some of the more, kind of passive media, but it has its inherent problems in terms of exchange and how we think something is valid. Something that gets a lot of likes is not necessarily more valid. Like, there's no connection between likes and validity or reliability of information. So again, it's the burden comes on, for the most part, the consumer of this information, who has to separate out the ways in which social media prioritizes information and the concept of legitimacy, reliability, and validity. That those are separate concepts. Now, social media, the web, these are socializing agents. They have norms, values, and expectations. These are communicated literally in terms of the rules and regulations for using these, and they're communicated through advertising. Another source, if you think about what advertising is it's what do we value? What do we want to put our money toward? What will make us happy? What will make us satisfied? Those kinds of things. That's what advertising does. Now, the two psychological processes are important to understand as we engage in social media that is unique to that kind of media. And the first is negativity bias, which has been analyzed for years, probably since the Vietnam War, where the live coverage of the Vietnam War was horrendous, but it informed the agents of media that there's a certain bias that we have for negative news. And it's built into our psychology. If I'm walking through the woods and everything is going fine, I don't need to react to that. I don't have to be continually joyous about that to maintain my happiness. Although mindfulness will kind of get you into that mode of switching over from trying to look out for dangers and appreciating, the moment. Bad news, however, like a growl or a snapped twig, or, I hear something or see something moving, I'm going to be more geared toward potential dangers or potential negative things happening than positive things. So the media works the same way. In fact, we're less interested in the things that are going okay because we're glad that those are happening. But tell me if something's going wrong, because I may need to act on that. So there's a pragmatic aspect of wanting the negative news. But there's that bias toward, my ears are going to pick up when things start going bad, not when they're continuing to go well. I'm just going to hope that holds on. But when things start going bad, that's what's going to perk up my ears. My antennas are going to go up. I'm going to tune into that. Now, the problem is not so much that we have this negative bias, but it coincides with availability heuristics. Now, heuristics is a term used to describe the way in which the methods that we use to create our sociological imagination, our sense of the world, our ideas of the world. It's the methodologies that we use for that. If we are surrounded by social media, and that social media is being constructed to sell us products, largely negative images, and we use those that are right near us, the availability, if we use a process of constructing our social world based on what's right in front of us, we are going to construct a highly negative, divisive sense of the world because that's what's right in front of us. If we don't go beyond page 2, if we don't even, let's say we might not even use Google to solve certain problems in our lives, might start there, but we're not going to end there. If we don't go further, go deeper, and develop heuristics or methodologies for developing our sense and understanding of the world that are beyond the things that are pushed right in front of us, then we will be subject to a very negative view of the world. Now, there's a great book that I'm recommending all of my students read. It's required reading in my psychology seminar class, and that's Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker. And it's a great book that talks about negativity bias, talks about availability heuristics, and how we can combat that in order to come to the realization that that is a false world. Those individual events are real. The negative things that are happening, that are portrayed in the news, are real and they're happening. But our conclusion that this is the world in its completion, that the world's going to hell, is inaccurate, and the numbers prove that. The world has been going in an extremely positive direction, and the numbers portray that. It's sometimes not even intuitive, but if it's not intuitive because we have within us a negative bias, and we are using availability heuristics to build our internal model of the world. And that book battles against that. In this lecture, am battling against that. It's not to be Pollyanna, it's just not to say that issues don't exist. Of course they exist, and we have to address them. But it's also important for us to recognize the trends that have been happening over the years, find out why those trends have been happening, and improving the welfare of people all over the world, and make sure that they keep happening. Make sure that those ideas get promoted and put forth because they've been working. So that's kind of it for this chapter. All that's due for this particular chapter is the Chapter 8 quiz, which largely has to do with the inequality in technology, the first part of my lecture. This part was captured in the discussion, and certainly would have been a rich discussion in our class about our own personal use of social media, our own use of what's available to us for the construction of our idea of the world, and how negatively biased that can be, and that we can choose another heuristic. We can choose a deeper, fact-finding, reliable sources-based heuristic for developing our sense of the world rather than relying on what's just in front of us. So that's the big lesson for this particular chapter. So again, my apologies for not having class. I hope this video is sufficient to help you get through that Chapter 8 along with the reading material. And I will see you all next week.